Welcome. This video will show how to create a basic Visual Studio project in C++ and how to code a simple application, the Hello World application. So when you start Visual Studio, from whichever method you choose, whether it's a copy that's installed on a local machine, that is the hard drive of your computer, your laptop, one of the lab computers, or by using Citrix, you will come up with a particular version of Visual Studio that you want to use. And in this case, I'm using Visual Studio 2013. Don't worry too much if each version or different versions look slightly different in terms of the interface. It's pretty much the same menu selections. It's just a matter of finding the window that you need to access. And ultimately, the editor window is the most important window, followed by the Solution Explorer, which shows all of your code, and then the output window. So right now I don't have a project created, but I will do so. So to do that, you start at the File menu and you pull down the menu and select New Project. The next thing that you will get is a list of available project types, and you see that my application has Visual Studio, Visual C++, that is, as the selected item, and that's what you want to start with for this class or any other class that you need to use Visual C++. But there are other languages like C#, Visual Basic, and other types of programming that you can do with Visual Studio, but we're going to focus on C++. And you see, when you pull down the menu, it gives you a bunch of extra selections, and on the right you also see a larger set of selections with icons. So what we want to select is Win32 console application as our first initial program, and then don't be too hasty with hitting enter or hitting OK. Look at the entire dialog box that you're dealing with and make sure that things are filled in appropriately before you hit OK. So the console application 1 is the default name for a console application, and that's too general, so you want to change it to something that is a little more descriptive. So in this case, we'll just call it Hello World, and then we see the location. I currently have a folder on my hard drive called CPP Programs. You will not have this folder unless you create it. So just keep in mind that you should have a folder where you put your projects. Try not to just accept the default. Use a folder that you know the name of, that you know where it's at. That way it'll be easier to find the code when you're looking for it. So I'm just going to leave it as CPP Programs, but for your case you have to put a folder in here. You could, in the meantime, you could add a folder using Windows Explorer or the command line and then specify that here. Now there's a couple of checkboxes here that you can select, but I would not recommend them right now. The Create Directory for Solution, sometimes people will like to select that, where it creates an extra directory for your solution, and to me it's just more levels of directories that are not necessary, and don't worry about the add to source control for now. So the thing is that you want to make sure that the name of the file or the name of the project is there, the location of the project, and the type of project are all properly set. Then you hit OK, and it will come up with this dialog box. So again, don't be too hasty at hitting next or finish look at what is on the screen and then select Application Settings, and you'll see a series of choices here which include whether it's a Windows application or a console application and so on, and then additional options where empty project is not checked. You would need to check that empty project. So that's the only really change that you need to make in the application settings dialog box. So after that, you verify that it's a console application, which was the default because that's the type of project we created, and then an empty project, then you can hit finish. So once you've hit finish, the finish button, you'll have the Solution Explorer populated with the basics of the project that you're about to work on. So it will have the name of the project, we'll see in a moment, and the solution that is, and then the project name is Hello World, and then you can see that it's got 4 different folders. Now these are not folders in the way that you expect them from Windows Explorer. These are project folders, and sometimes it could be confusing, as to what you call a folder, but within the project it's a folder as in just a place where certain categories of files are stored. But in the operating system, you will have a folder that holds your project, and we could look at that contents of that later, but just focus on what's in the project. And if you want to look at how the operating system stores things, that's a different issue altogether, but it's something that you should know. You should go into Windows Explorer and then see where the various files are stored. So we see the one that's most important at first is the source files folder within the project. If we right click on that, you'll get a dialog box that allows you to add. So that's pretty much the only item that we want to select from this dialog box is the add option, and then we say new item. So this is something you do for every project. You want to start with this kind of a procedure where you create the project, you get a blank solution, and then you add a new item. So what we're going to add is going to show up next, where we have a choice between a C++ or CPP file and a header file. So if you want to create it, which is what we really want to do, is create a C++ program, you select this first one, and you can see that it defaults you to a file name called source.cpp. Now that is rather generic, and every time you create a project you're going to get that option, so you could end up having a bunch of files called source.cpp but in different projects, which is fine. But if you want to change this from the get-go, that way you can identify the file more easily than just by the name source, you can name it. Now here you have to realize that the name of the project is Hello World, but the source files can be any name. They could be the same name as the project, they can be a variation of the name of the project, they could be any number of names, because you could have many different CPP files in one project. So when you name this, just be thoughtful about it. I'm just going to call it Hello, so it's not confused with the name of the project, but notice that the name of the project is Hello World. So that's where the source file, which is the actual code of the program, is going to be stored. So once we've specified the name, then we can click on Add, and now we see that the hello.cpp file now appears underneath the source files in Solution Explorer. So the Solution Explorer is very key initially when you start creating a project. Now what we see here on the left is the actual editor, and I'm going to start writing the code, and this is something that you have to put in every time. Include IOStream, pound include IOStream, and then a separate line is using namespace std. Now they oftentimes appear together, those two lines of code, but what we're actually doing is two different things. One is to include a header file which contains the code that enables you to use such things as cin, cout, and many of the most common kinds of code elements. You'll see that later we could put many different header files besides just IOStream. The using namespace standard is basically establishing that the standard std namespace, which is a collection of objects, if you will, that have a particular categorization of being in the std namespace, is that we'll be defaulting to that namespace. But here again, you could use several namespaces if you wanted to, but this is how we start out. So we're going to use namespace standard, and then we have to create a main program or a main method or main function. A lot of ways of saying the same thing, but it's a main function. And let me just up the text size here, so now you can see a little better as to what I'm creating. And we create this function called int main, and because it's been declared as an int rather than void, we have to put a return statement in here. And this is just a conventional way of setting up a main, where you just say return 0 and you go on your way. So don't worry too much about that it doesn't say void main or that it has a return statement in it. It's just the way that we start a basic program in C++. So the next thing is, let's put in a little statement that says cout less than, and then in quotations, hello, comma, capital WORLD, and then another less than, endl. Now, what this is basically going to do is output the string which is given by the contents of this double quoted group of characters. We call it a string literal, and then it's going to generate a new line, which is a carriage return line feed. And basically it's the most simple program that you can write just to output a message. Now you should always use a little bit of white space. You can see that I was generous with the white space here, which is just blank lines between lines every now and then, just so that you can highlight the code, be I guess more easy to debug and read it. That's really the reason why we have white space. Now we want to run this, so we have to go into the build menu and click on build and then say build solution. So once we click on the build solution, you'll notice that there's some activity in the output window, and it's saying build started, project hello world, configuration debug Win32. So it's going to build the program and it's taking a moment for whatever reason. It shouldn't take so long for a simple program, but you can see it just built the program, one succeeded, and then you go to debug, start without debugging. Do not use start debugging, or don't just hit the play button. You really want to say start without debugging, because that will ensure that the code will run. And there we see the output is hello world, and this concludes the video